Modern-day Bedford hardly resembles the town that Dr. Foote helped create. But there are hints of the past to be found. On the northwest corner of 16th and J Street is the Moses Fell building. Moses was a friend of Dr. Foote's and whom bought the Palestine courthouse. He bought the courthouse to provide Lawrence County the money to rebuild in Bedford. Back in Dr. Foote's time, Moses had both his house and business on this corner. Moses and Dr. Foote also became partners in business on January 4th, 1830, selling whiskey as Foote and Fell. The current courthouse wasn't even built until 1930, long after Dr. Foote's time. 2 courthouses were constructed at Palestine. Once the county seat was moved from Palestine to Bedford, a temporary log courthouse was built in 1825. There was yet another built in 1834, and then the first stately-looking courthouse built in 1872. In its history, Lawrence County has had 6 courthouses in all, a state record. While Dr. Foote never saw the grand 1872 courthouse, you can see his house and office on 15th and I Street, diagonal across the square from Moses Fell. The current Masonic temple sits exactly to the left of where Dr. Foote's house once stood. He started off by building a log cabin in 1826, but in 1830 he built a second home. It resembled the homes of his native Newtown, Connecticut, and was quite unique for the area. The log cabin became his office, but it was later sold and moved. He then built a formal office next to the house in 1838. The house and office stayed in the family for many years. The office later became the business of his son, Winthrop Jr. It was called Foote and Parker. But we need to go back to 1825, at the very beginning of Bedford and Dr. Foote's influence. "1825 started off on a sour note, with Cynthia's father, Thomas Jefferson Barlow, dying on January 30th. Dr. Foote's sister, Olive, also passed away that year, as well as Cynthia's nephew, Thomas Barlow, that was named after her father. Winthrop went home in May of 1825 to see his parents, and possibly comfort them in the wake of his sister Olive's death. It was a long trip home from Indiana to Newtown, Connecticut. Certainly, he had a long time to think. Considering his parents' age, each trip could be the last time he'd see them alive. But he'd made a complete life for himself, some 900 miles away in Bedford, Indiana. And that's where he belonged. People needed him there. Earlier in March 1825, began a series of lawsuits between Dr. Foote and Palestine's former sheriff, Joseph Glover. It would last a record 24 years. Joseph Glover owed Dr. Foote money, but said the debt had been dismissed. Dr. Foote, being a trained man of the law, won the case by establishing there was no proof. Dr. Foote won $235.18, plus court costs of $5.94. But this was only the beginning. The cases went back and forth for years, eventually leading up to an appeal in the Indiana Supreme Court at Indianapolis. When Joseph Glover died suddenly on July 21st, 1844, his appeal went on without him. Dr. Foote won this one also in November of 1844. However, when Dr. Foote sued his estate, saying that Glover still owed him $293.15, he finally lost and had to pay $12.10 in court costs. This answers the age-old question of what did people do before TV and internet? They sued each other to have something to do. On December 13th, 1826, Dr. Foote's mother, Anna Prindle Foote, passed away at 73 years old. Unlike today, when we can get on an airplane or drive a day or two, traveling 900 miles to Connecticut in the winter was unthinkable. But life in Bedford went on, with Dr. Foote establishing his medical practice and a strong reputation. Over the next 4 years, Mr. and Mrs. Foote had 3 more of their own children. Minerva was born October 17, 1827. She would later hold the distinction of owning the first piano in Lawrence County, bought by her doting father, Dr. Foote. She would marry General James Winning McMillan, a Civil War hero. They are both buried at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Oscar was born December 23, 1828. He would later fight in the Mexican-American War and follow in his father's footsteps by studying medicine. This made Dr. Foote incredibly proud. And Anne Maria, presumably named after Dr. Foote's mother, was born July 19, 1830. The household was getting larger, but it was about to get even more so. After Dr. Foote's brother, Prosper Alonzo, passed away September 10, 1831, his 3 children, Charlotte, John, and Robert, came to live with the family. The house was packed. Perhaps having so many children under one roof eased the pain of so many losses. Dr. Foote was highly respected, and he had earned it. He was the man that saved the people of Palestine, the man that had legally set up Bedford and helped establish order. He was a successful businessman, a role model, a family man, prosperous beyond all Lawrence County standards. He was on the proverbial mountain. That was until Anne Maria contracted measles and died unexpectedly on March 5, 1832. She was only a year old, just a few months away from her 2nd birthday. Having to bury his little girl triggered a dark place in his soul. It was a theme throughout Dr. Foote's life. A loss of control spiritually sent him back to that deep Gibson County pond that claimed the life of his brother. It created a desperate need for action. It would be the start of both great and terrible things ahead. On December 15th, 1832, just 9 months after Anne Maria died, Winthrop Alvin Foote Jr. was born. It was a new start with a new baby, but there was no caution to be had. Tragedy brings out different responses in different people, with some wallowing in self-pity and questions, and others diving headfirst into any acceptable diversion. Dr. Foote acquired 3,000 acres in both Lawrence and neighboring counties, and he knew just what he was going to do with it. Dr. Foote traveled to Kentucky and found a man that knew how to cut limestone, master stonecutter Samuel Turpen. He convinced Mr. Turpen to come to Bedford, Indiana, with giant plans. All great civilizations have involved stonecutters, forming solid rock into epic structures that command respect. Dr. Foote believed that the limestone on his land could be quarried to build cities, ones that would rival the marvels of the ancient world. Together, they opened the Blue Hole Quarry at Bedford, Indiana, and from it came huge buildings of unbelievable beauty. At first, much of the stone was used for foundations and building bridges. But as time passed, bigger and more elaborate requests were made. Skilled stonecutters and artisans came to Lawrence County to work in the limestone industry, and year by year, growing their reputation that would declare Lawrence County the limestone capital of the world. Dr. Foote's tireless energy and vision built an empire that still exists nearly 200 years later, earning him the title, the father of the limestone industry. In a day before trains and roads made the frontier accessible, he prophesied that someday Indiana limestone would be used as far away as New York City. And he was right. And not only there, but many iconic buildings in Washington, D.C. Bedford limestone has been exported throughout the United States and even internationally, with a large amount going to Canada. Even the Vatican in Europe as Indiana limestone. Dr. Foote imagined a world that others could not see, and without doubt, Lawrence County is forever in his debt. On March 9th, 1835, his last child, Isis, was born. By this time, Winthrop was a middle-aged, 47-year-old man. He had given up being a lawyer and focused on being a doctor and mentoring other young physicians in the county. But he was not just a doctor. In 1839, Dr. Foote was elected Lawrence County Treasurer. He was also a businessman, land speculator, quarry owner, and philanthropist, giving to local charities and churches. His name was mentioned everywhere, and he was everywhere. To say he was active in the community is an understatement. Either on foot or on his horse, he was in every corner of Lawrence County life. But no man is beyond the trials and tribulations of this life, always just one tragedy away from the end of their happiness. On October 31st, 1850, Halloween night, his son, Oscar Foote, the Mexican-American War veteran, died of diabetes. That was the official cause of death. In truth, he was tired of his struggle with severe diabetes and committed suicide. Oscar had went to Dr. Foote's office while he was away and poisoned himself with one of the many powerful drugs that were on hand. James Carleton found Oscar lying on the floor, but still alive. Oscar told him, "I've killed myself, and no one can blame me." Dr. Foote was alerted and came back to the office immediately, but nothing he had learned in over 30 years of practice could save his own son. Slowly the hours passed, and Oscar faded away. He died at midnight. Oscar was buried at Green Hill Cemetery. He was only 21 years old, just a year older than Dr. Foote's brother, Ziba, when he passed away. Some might say that the similarity and loss of control brought back the darkness that never really left Dr. Foote. He began drinking heavily. On August 24th, 1851, less than a year after Oscar died, his 16-year-old daughter, Isis, contracted typhoid fever and also passed away. Like his brother Ziba, Winthrop was drowning, but by one bottle at a time. By 1852, Dr. Foote's wife was granted a divorce after nearly 30 years of marriage. Cynthia had enough of the drinking, but cited adultery as the main reason for the divorce. She named Lucinda Shipman, a woman 33 years younger than her husband, in the court proceedings. And painfully, the incident in question happened just one day after they'd buried their son Oscar. Clearly, the kingdom that Winthrop Foote had created sank in a sea of despair. On January 31st, 1856, Winthrop Foote married Lucinda Shipman. He was 68 and she was 34, literally half his age. The divorce from his wife of many years, an age gap of the new marriage, were frowned upon in the community. His remaining children couldn't believe what their father had done. On April 8, 1856, Dr. Foote's son, Ziba Foote, filed a lawsuit against his own father. The court filing said, Dr. Foote suffered from habitual and uncontrollable drunkenness. He was squandering the family fortune and was not mentally capable of managing his own affairs. For a fact, Dr. Foote paid about $4,000 for a custom-made casket for himself. In today's money, that would be worth over $138,000. But even though Dr. Foote didn't show up for court, being too ill or too drunk, he won his last case. The verdict? We, the jury, find that Dr. Winthrop Foote is a person of sound mind and capable of managing his own estate. People remembered the decades of good that he had done. He might have won the hearts of those in Lawrence County, but in the end, lost his entire family. But just 6 months after he had married Lucinda, on August 2nd, 1856, Dr. Winthrop Alvin Foote passed away. The family paid Lucinda to leave town and disavow any claim to Dr. Foote's estate, perhaps hoping to erase the last dark year and a half of his life and preserve the image of the truly good things he had done for Lawrence County, which were many. Dr. Foote was not buried at the Foote family plot at Green Hill Cemetery, a plot that held the bodies of Maria, Oscar, Isis, and later Cynthia, their son Winthrop Jr., and his wife. Dr. Foote had arranged to be placed here, in this lonely, quiet place, a short distance from his Blue Hole quarry. After a lifetime of noble deeds and huge accomplishments, the last year and a half of his life had been the opposite of the legend. The death of his beloved son Oscar and teenage daughter Isis had completely unraveled his life. He was reduced to an alcoholic and an adulterer. He went to his grave knowing what all he had accomplished, and yet all that he had lost. The tomb, which is below the monument, is actually a large piece of limestone that fell from the nearby cliff. In 1832, Dr. Foote asked master stonecutter Samuel Tobin to cut it to size and carve a vault from its center for his brother Ziba. Winthrop believed that the quiet valley, surrounded by beech trees and flowing water, would be the perfect setting for eternal rest. He retrieved his brother's remains from Palestine and buried him in the vault for the third and final time. It was a tomb fit for a king. It ended up being a tomb for two kings. In this old photograph, you can see that the grand tomb once had a finely carved orb on the top. This is an amazing old picture of the tomb's interior. The large coffin to the left, wrapped in iron, contains Dr. Foote. No one is completely sure why he chose to have the coffin wrapped in iron, or why he spent so much money on the coffin itself, one that resembled something for an Egyptian pharaoh. To the right is a small container that holds Ziba Foote's remains that were completely reduced to bones. To the unknowing, a rumor started that Winthrop's dog was euthanized and buried with him in that small container. But it was actually the remains of his brother Ziba. Another rumor was that Dr. Foote's favorite horse, Old Logan, was euthanized and buried with him. Old Logan had faithfully taken him to so many Lawrence County house calls, and Dr. Foote was very fond of him. But in fact, Old Logan headed the funeral procession on the day of the funeral, and while the other horses were sold, Old Logan was kept to graze until his last days. The Foote family said that when Old Logan died, he was buried not far from Dr. Foote, somewhere on the nearby hill. As Dr. Foote dearly loved his brother, he had it written on the tomb, "And by the buried bones of him whom living I loved best, see me at last laid quietly, then leave me to my rest." But there was much more to the story than that. Dr. Foote would often gather his children and tell them about their wonderful Uncle Ziba, how intelligent and hardworking he was, how even though he struggled with paying for his own education, gave half of what he earned to Winthrop. Because of Ziba, Winthrop could become both a doctor and a lawyer, escaping the poverty of their childhood. This huge sacrifice is why Dr. Foote felt completely indebted to his brother, and perhaps why he felt so guilty. Ziba never got to enjoy the success that he did. Ziba gave Winthrop half of what he earned. And with this tomb, Winthrop gave half of it to Ziba for eternity. On the opposite side of the monument, Dr. Foote reaches out to this day with kind sentiment. "And so farewell, my dear good friends, and farewell world to thee. I part with some in love, with all in peace and charity." In the decades after he died, people would visit his grand tomb and consider the legend that built a town and limestone industry. How did one man accomplish so much in just 68 years? Steel guitar legend Bud Isaacs would often sit on the edge of the tomb and play his guitar among the quiet trees of the valley. A fellow doctor and friend of Dr. Foote's wrote his obituary, saying, "May his many noble deeds and virtues live in the memories of his friends, while his few follies be forgotten, as he was only mortal." Dr. Foote was mortal indeed, but with a lifetime of amazing, almost superhuman good deeds, tarnished by the last year and a half of his life. But would Bedford, or its mighty limestone industry, known the world over, have ever existed if not for Dr. Foote? And would Lawrence County have ever been more than small, lawless villages scattered across the countryside? What is certain is that Lawrence County never knew a man like him before he rode into town from nowhere. Nor has it since Dr. Foote last rode Old Logan down its many roads and into the history of Lawrence County. Rest in peace, Dr. Foote. Based on the book The Man in the Tomb by Brian Turpen.